Welcome to the wonderful world of Pokémon. Oh, wait, sorry, that's the wrong footage. Welcome to the wonderful world of Pokémon. I mean, sure, Pokémon might not live here, but you're kidding yourself if you think they don't have our world by the balls. Pokémon games, Pokémon shows, Pokémon movies, Pokémon toys and clothes and theme parks, you name it. People are putting themselves in debt bulk ordering Pokémon cardboard, hoping some other suckers will buy it at an even higher price. Pokémon has made us sleep, Pokémon has made us brush our teeth, Pokémon made us get up and march twice. I won't be surprised if in 5 years people give themselves cardiac arrest trying to catch Guzzlord in Pokémunch, available on Android and iOS. Pikachu sits atop his throne like Alexander the Great, weeping for he has no more lands to conquer. I'm here to wipe these tears away, my parasocial pocket pal, and point you in the direction of your next business endeavor, tabletop gaming. Of course, being a franchise which started in the 90s, Pokémon has dipped its toes in the tabletop genre before. There's original games like 1999's Pokémon Master Trainer and 2016's Pokémon Duel, as well as tie-ins with other board games like Monopoly, Labyrinth, and Scrabble. There's even a special Pokémon Battle Chess, which I'm not even going to begin to pretend I understand. However, I think you'll notice a common through line. Who the hell cares about any of this? If you want to play Monopoly, you can just play Monopoly without the Pika paint. And no one's talking about the original games anymore, especially Duel, which had an app component that shut down in 2019. Unfortunately, Pokémon really hasn't brought anything to the table worth playing, pun very much intended. And in an age where my For You page keeps getting those animated clips from D&D campaigns, I think Pokémon really ought to try and capture that audience. But, of course, you won't lure in the dungeon crawlers with Candyland. You need something closer to their level. Something grand. Something epic. Something worthy of the title, The Battle of All Time. Something like HeroScape. Meanwhile, in the gilded halls of Valhalla.
What's all this about, Jandar?
Sergeant Alexander, I have called you here to show you a vision I've had. A vision of another worthy member of our ranks.
Alright, if you think he's gonna help us push back the minions of Utgar, I'm all ears.
He comes from your planet in the 21st century. He has monuments all around the globe. His mere name sends a crowd into a frenzy. He rises with
Alright, I gotta cut you off there, Jandar. We got like 2 minutes before Solid JJ realizes we stole this bit from him. Let's just get on with it.
Right, of course. Summoning this new warrior!
Vika?
On second thought, I should have let you sell this harder. What the fuck is this?
This is the newest member of our army.
The fuck he is? We just had the Exterminator in here the other day. We just kicked him out. You want to bring him back in?
Drake, you best not underestimate this fine warrior. Your people, a mere 60 years in your future, worship him like a god.
Jandar, that's the Macy's parade.
What?
Yeah, like they hang up balloons and fly them around town for the kids. It's a fun little novelty thing.
Oh.
They fly balloons of like cartoon characters like Felix the Cat. You just recruited Donald Duck for our fight against Utgar.
Good heavens.
Yeah, I know. This isn't gonna work out.
No, what the fuck is that? That's Donald Duck?
Well, yeah, sure. That's in a manner of speaking, Donald Duck, yes.
Why does he look like that? Is he ill? Is he in need of wellspring water?
Look, man, it was a depression year. We did our best. Like, you don't need to rag on it too hard.
Depression?
Yeah, you know, the 1930s, a really poor financial time for everyone involved.
Oh, yes, you mean Big Debt 1.
Big Debt 1?
Well, yeah, you know how after the Great War ended and then a second Great War started, so you guys called the first one World War I in hindsight? Yeah, that happens again.
Like how far in the future are we talking here?
About 100 years after the first one.
Oh. Well, I'll be dead by then. I don't give a shit. So, what do you want to do with the rat?
I don't normally do this, but I already summoned them, so if you could just take them on a rotation.
Fine. Alright, I'll make this work.
It's just a rat! How will we lose him?
HeroScape is baby's first war game, which means it's not for babies. The troops range from aliens to samurai to orcs riding dinosaurs, and players recruit them to form their ranks. You build your army and even the battlefield itself, and fight to see whose side will reign supreme. It launched back in 2004 to a resounding The premise was cool, and so was this very 90s animated trailer, but the game itself is dense. Where most games could fit their rules on a two-sided page or maybe a pamphlet, HeroScape had an entire goddamn manual. You weren't going to convince your parents to crack this open when Boggle is sitting right there. I know, I've tried. This might seem like an odd pick for a Pokemon tie-in, especially if the game's supposedly hard to wrap your head around. To that I say, try explaining to a layman what the hell a Terra Electric Air Balloon Shedinja is and why it's a problem. Pokemon is an insanely convoluted series, but we all kind of forget that being in the fanbase for so long. I think Pokemon fans are not just capable of understanding this complexity, but actively crave it. Besides, most board games already start with a rule reading section where everyone's eyes glaze over, but once you're in the thick of it, everything starts to come together. Now, to address the elephant in the room, why should Pokemon collaborate with a game that, statistically, none of you have heard of? I mean, it was discontinued in 2010, failed to crowdfund a revival in 2022, got the revival anyway, yet still averages less traffic than fucking Go, a game which was invented thousands of years ago and solved in 2002. Well, call me naive or blinded by nostalgia, but I feel HeroScape was a game before its time. It came out in the mid-aughts, so it missed out on the D&D market of the 2010s, even after getting its D&D crossover expansion. This was its second expansion, the first being a Marvel set released in 2007. I know what you're thinking, Marvel's huge, this has to be where HeroScape pops off, right? Well, maybe in an alternate timeline, specifically one where the set released about a year later. Yes, this isn't MCU Marvel we're talking about, where at least one of your coworkers cried over Iron Man's death, and Thanos is Fortnite's dopest dancer. This is Dork Marvel, for fans who can list each of Spider-Man's girlfriends in chronological order, and who know Big Wheel civilian name off by heart. Unfortunately, this crowd wasn't big enough or interested enough to save Hasbro's struggling board game, and they pawned the rights off to Wizards of the Coast before they can make a follow-up. Maybe a collab with the biggest media empire of all time is a bit overkill, but I think HeroScape just needs a little boost to get more eyes on it. It'll certainly be more helpful than the next crossover, with G.I. Joe. Let me guess, the Cabbage Patch Kids were busy? You couldn't afford the $6 million man? Popeye's not that hard to work with, and he's at least got some cultural relevance left. Seriously, you're not going to draw in more fans if you only include things that also have no fans. Pokemon is just what HeroScape needs. A large fan base of nerds who aren't thrown off by probability statistics and damage calculations. But what does the Pokemon Company get out of this? I mean, I think I can just put up a couple pictures of HeroScape minifigures and how much they go for, and the executives watching this will start seeing dollar signs dancing in their heads. Now that I'm sure everyone agrees this would be the literal coolest thing ever, there's only one question left. Okay, but like, what even is a HeroScape? And you know what? Fair point. Maybe I should have led with that. I'm going to take a second to explain a bit more about what HeroScape even is and how it's played. Each game takes place on a map you build yourself, with interlocking hexagonal tiles. Unlike traditional war games, which measure in real-world centimeters and inches, these tiles simplify movement and range attacks to spaces on a board, so you can put the measuring tape away, Grandpa. Characters move across the map based on their move value, and see if they can attack based on their range value. If an enemy is in range, you can roll the amount of dice in your attack value, while they roll dice based on their defense value. If you roll more skulls than they roll shields, the enemy takes damage to their life value until they're destroyed. These dice have 3 skulls, 2 shields, and 1 blank space baby, so attack rolls are slightly more effective than defense rolls. Additionally, each character has special powers outlined in the text on the left side of their card. These add the extra flavor that their stats alone can't provide, ranging from helping them move around the map, to buffs for their teammates, to alternate attacks with special effects. These can turn a fairly average character into one of the best units in the game. All of these stats and abilities are factored into a unit's cost value, which determines the units a player can recruit to their army at the start of a game. If you and your opponent are challenging each other with 500-point armies, You can only get 2 or 3 dragons before you run out of points, so it makes sense to back them up with some cheaper units. A lot of these cheaper units are what's known as squad units, compared to the bigger hero units. A squad unit consists of between 2 to 4 figures, all controlled by the same card, giving you multiple actions to take in one turn. Hero units can't do as much in one turn, but generally have better stats than squads. This is especially true for life points, since all classic squads only have a life of 1 and die in a single hit. Squads are also more likely to be categorized as common, whereas heroes are more likely to be unique, meaning you can include multiple copies of squads like the Knights of Weston or the Blastotrons, but only one copy of heroes like Sir Denric or Major Q10. This typically results in armies having a couple of strong heroes swarmed by hordes of squad units. Once the battle begins, Heroscape is turn-based. The game is broken up into rounds consisting of 3 turns. Each player rolls the 20-sided die, and whoever rolls highest moves first that round. But they can't just move whoever they want. They have to pick their turns in advance. Each player gets 4 markers labeled 1, 2, 3, and X, and place them on the army cards corresponding with the characters they want to take their next 3 turns with. These markers are placed facing away from your opponent, and the X one is a fake to make them unsure which characters you're using. If you get to a turn and your character isn't in a good position, or worse, is dead, that's too bad, and your turn is wasted. A big part of the strategy in Heroscape is deciding which character you'll move on which turn, based on who you think your opponent will be moving on their turns. As you progress through the game, it's almost inevitable that one of your figures will end up on a space next to an opponent's figure. When this happens, these figures are engaged. Not engaged like, oh, look at the happy couple, more engaged in a fight to the death. A figure cannot attack characters further away from them when they're in an engagement. They have more pressing concerns to deal with. Naturally, if you have a ranged figure engaged to a melee figure, you'll want to run away and get your advantage back. But there's a catch. Figures leaving an engagement are prone to a leaving engagement attack. The opponent rolls 1 die, and if they get a skull, your figure takes a wound they cannot defend against. This helps to balance the power between ranged and melee fighters. Ranged figures obviously have the advantage at a distance, but once the melee figure gets close, the ranged figure needs to risk getting stabbed in the back for running away. The last thing I ought to go over is the terrain. Part of the fun of building your own map is stacking giant hills and mountains on them, but these actually serve a gameplay function. When moving, characters can climb up elevations in terrain by adding a space for each tile in the stack. For example, if this Viking wants to climb up a ledge which is 2 tiles tall, then it takes 3 move to get up there, 1 for each tile he climbed plus the space he's actually landing on. To reward this Viking for the extra effort he took to climb up here, he now has height advantage against any figure on a tile lower than his, giving him an extra die for his defense rolls and his normal attacks. And in case you were wondering, you can move down terrain without using extra moves, but if a character jumps down a ledge equal to or greater than their height, they could take a wound from fall damage. Alright, there's no getting around it, that was a lot. There's still plenty of stuff I didn't get into, but I think that's enough to give you an idea on what a game of Heroscape looks like. Let's start talking about why you're here. What would a Pokemon Heroscape look like? No, not the Hero's Cape. Pokemon Heroscape. One of the best things about Heroscape is how you can really make anything work as a Heroscape figure. The base game already pulls so much from fantasy, history, and science fiction, but any character can feel at home with the right special powers. It wouldn't take much to slot Pokemon into Heroscape like the other figures, but I think it deserves a little extra spice to drive home the Pokemon feel. And there's no mechanic more fundamental to Pokemon than typing. I think typing in Heroscape should be stripped down to the bare minimum, where each type gets 1 type it's super effective against and 1 type it resists, to simplify the type chart a bit. In Heroscape, that translates to adding an extra attack die against figures with the first type, and an extra defense die against figures with the second type. While most buffs in Heroscape only affect normal attacks, I think type effectiveness should extend to special attacks as well, since they're more situational than height advantage, and easier for the opponent to avoid than things like attack glyphs. You could probably keep the whole type chart intact and boost for every type interaction a Pokemon has, but that could get very silly very quickly, so I'm sticking to a simpler type chart. To help types feel more impactful, I'm going to give each of them a special ability, and each Pokemon of that type will have that ability by default. This could run the risk of making the cards too samey, especially since very few cards go over 3 abilities, so a dual-type Pokemon only has room for 1 more. However, that shouldn't be an issue if we just avoid putting in 2 Pokemon with the same dual typing. Plus, some of these types will have abilities which would feel weird not giving to every single unit of that type, and it feels just as weird to limit those types, but not others. I'm going to give a quick breakdown of each type's matchups and special abilities. You can skip to this timestamp to just get to the new type chart, though you might be a bit lost when we get to the next section if you don't hear the ability breakdowns. To kick things off, we have the starter trio of Water, Fire, and Grass. They will each be super effective against and resist the same type. So Fire both rolls an extra attack die and an extra defense die when dealing with Grass types. For the Water type ability, we're going with Swift Swim. One of the tiles you can place on the map are water tiles, and when most characters walk onto one, they have to stop their movement for the turn. But of course, a water type can swim through the water no problem. Additionally, if they only move through water tiles, they can move 3 spaces more than usual. This takes even an average move value of 5 to a staggering 8, which is one of the fastest move values in base HeroScape. This is balanced by limiting the move to only water tiles, which are both pretty sparse on most competitive maps and lower than the surrounding tiles. This forces characters on water tiles to give their opponents height advantage, so a water type sacrifices some of its combat potential to take advantage of the extra movement. Still, while the extra movement is fairly situational, not needing to stop on water tiles is a pretty solid buff by itself. Fire is also getting a terrain-based ability with Flash Fire. There are 2 high-temperature tiles, Lava Field and Molten Lava. Molten Lava not only forces characters to stop moving like water does, but it also forces them to roll the 20-sided die. If they roll anything lower than a 20, they die instantly. Because, yeah, you shouldn't walk on lava, stupid. Lava Field isn't as dangerous, but if you're still standing on it at the end of the round, there's a 50-50 chance you take a wound. HeroScape has figures which can walk through these tiles normally, but they're all melee figures. If I gave my fire types this kind of ability, they couldn't have ranged attacks, or else they could fire them from the middle of a pool of molten lava with very little counterplay. So instead, I only gave fire types protection from molten lava if they keep moving through it. They can withstand the heat just long enough to keep running across. They now get a boost to their attack for standing on these tiles, but they do so at the risk of taking damage from them. A bit of high risk, high reward, especially for squad figures. Lastly, Grass has 2 abilities, one for squads and one for heroes. The heroes get Leech Seed, which heals a wound off their card whenever they destroy an adjacent figure. This works the same as the Life Drain ability many vampire figures get, just specifying that the target has to be adjacent to your grass type to account for grass types with ranged attacks. Obviously, squad figures cannot heal wounds if they only have 1 life point, so they get Leaf Guard instead, preventing them from being targeted by enemy special abilities when adjacent to another grass type figure. This doesn't protect them from special attacks, but this can force your opponent to waste their attacks on your squads, when normally they can handle them with abilities like Grimnack's Chomp or Braxis' Poisonous Acid Breath. Those are the starter types. Now for the first type you encounter in the wild. Despite the name, Normal's going to be a bit unique, in that we're changing the existing type chart for it. As most of you already know, Normal does not hit anything super effectively in Pokémon, but to help balance our types in HeroScape, Normal will be super effective against itself. Normal will also resist Ghost types, since their immunity to Ghost is the only defensive trait the type has. Like Grass, Normal gets different abilities for its heroes and for its squads. Heroes get Normalize, allowing them to use their special attacks like normal attacks. This usually just means you can now get height advantage on them, but this also gives dual types a way to apply their other type's ability to special attacks. It also lets you roll for a leaving engagement attack with height advantage, which is situational but pretty funny. The squads, meanwhile, get Scrappy, letting one of them attack a figure at normal power, then the rest getting a boost when targeting the same figure. It's handy for taking on big heroes with a lot of life points, or really making sure that one important figure is gone by the end of the turn. Next, let's look at Electric. Electric gets an attack boost against flying types, and a defense boost against steel types. Their static ability lets them roll the 20-sided die after wounding a hero figure. If they roll high enough, that hero loses a turn, kind of like paralysis in the real games. This ability is the same for heroes and squads, but the squad figures need a higher roll to activate, since they have more attacks per turn to trigger it. You can't talk about Electric without discussing ground types, and unfortunately, I had to commit a pretty grievous sin. Ground does not resist Electric types. In order to keep the starter types countering each other, I left Dragon with no types to resist except Electric. So Ground has to take neutral damage in order for Dragon to resist something accurate. This still feels wrong, but I hope you can understand why I did that. Ground is super effective against Electric, obviously, but now its sole resistance is to rock types. Ground types also have different abilities between squads and heroes, though they basically do the same thing. Earthquake allows ground type heroes to hit all the figures adjacent to them with the same attack roll. The Bulldoze ability allows ground type squads to do the same at the cost of an attack die. Both of these abilities have the user target one character first, and then any other adjacent enemies. This lets the ground type maximize their damage by targeting an electric type, or a figure it has height advantage over, then applying that boost to all the figures it attacks this turn. Next up, we have the Rock type. Rock is super effective against ice and resists flying. The Rock type ability is Smackdown. When a Rock type wounds an enemy figure with its normal attack, that figure cannot use any movement abilities for the rest of the round. This ties into a bunch of Rock type attacks, like how Rock Tomb lowers speed and Rock Slide can flinch, but the name Smackdown was chosen since this is a good counter to flying type heroes especially. Speaking of, let's go over the flying type. Flying types get an attack boost against Bug and a defense boost against Ground. Their ability, Flying, is both one of the most common abilities in base HeroScape and one of the most powerful, allowing characters to completely ignore hazards and elevations while moving. It's such a common ability and so wordy that the newer cards don't bother writing out the whole description, so we won't either. Going from one of the best abilities to a more situational one, we have the Bug type. Their ability, Shed Skin, lets them potentially ignore the effects of a special ability, or the secondary effect of a special attack. The odds are pretty good, but not infallible, but just having the odds this high should deter your opponent from trying to pick off your bugs with special powers. It won't stop them from just attacking them, of course. And of course, Bug is super effective against Dark and resists fighting. Speaking of the fighting type, I was able to carry over one of my favorite type interactions into HeroScape. Just like in the main games, Bug resists fighting, but fighting resists Bug back, the only two types to have this property. Fighting is also super effective against Steel types. Their ability, Brick Break, lets fighting types emulate the offensive prowess they have in the main games without being too overwhelming. Getting a guaranteed skull for taking on opponents with high defense can punish the opponent for plays they'd normally make, like grabbing height to boost their defense, and put the odds back in the fighting type's favor. Since this extra skull is guaranteed, that defense boost is guaranteed to block no additional damage, and has a 2/3 chance to not block the extra skull, which just boosts the fighting type's offense. And of course, this can be used to beat up figures with naturally high defense as well. Next is the Poison type. Poison types are both super effective against and resist Fairy types. Their ability, Toxic, gives them a chance to inflict an extra wound on figures they wound with their normal attack. Like electric types, this chance is lower for squads than it is for heroes. This is based on a secondary effect of a special attack from classic HeroScape, Sajoa's Poison Sting special attack. Sajoa has better odds than a poison type hero and even a chance to keep chaining poison damage or destroy the figure outright, but I figured my poison types would be significantly cheaper and potentially have range on this ability, so it made sense to make theirs worse than Sajoa's. To help combat poison types, try enlisting a Psychic type. Psychic types are super effective against poison while resisting themselves. Like ground types, their ability is basically the same between heroes and squads, just with a nerf to the squad version. Psychic heroes get Teleport, which both gives them a higher move than most figures and ignores leaving engagement attacks. This ability sacrifices their attack for the turn, but given that most Psychic types will lean towards ranged attacks anyway, they can sacrifice an attacking turn to regain some distance for future turns, which not many ranged figures can do when surrounded. It's also important to note that they cannot climb nor descend elevation while teleporting, which will likely impede its usefulness in the early game. This shouldn't prevent them from escaping with it though. Plus, they can now avoid things like hazardous terrain and even solid walls while moving, which can be handy. Psychic squads get Agility, which does the same thing but travels a slightly shorter distance. Next up is the Ghost type. Ghost types are super effective against Psychic types and resist normal types. Their ability, Infiltrator, lets Ghost types walk through enemy figures, walls, and other obstacles, and also prevents them from taking leaving engagement attacks, making Ghost types incredibly sneaky. Going from sneaky to chilly, we have the Ice type. Ice is super effective against ground while resistant to itself. Their ability, Snow Veil, lets Ice types walk normally on snow and ice tiles. Normally, a character needs to use 2 moves to move onto one snow or one ice tile, essentially halving their move value. Snow Veil bypasses this movement debuff while also boosting the Ice type's defense when standing on one of these snow or ice tiles, like how Ice types now get a defense boost in the snow in Gen 9. Snow also tends to be some of the highest elevation on the competitive maps that include it, so Ice types will get their Snow Veil boost plus height advantage, making them surprisingly durable. The main drawback to this ability is just that snow and ice tiles aren't as common as water tiles, which are already far from mandatory on all maps, so in plenty of matches this ability won't do anything. The last of the original types is Dragon. Dragon is super effective against itself and resistant to electric types. Their ability, Mold Breaker, is one of the strongest attacking abilities in HeroScape. Your opponent's figures have no abilities when a Dragon type attacks them. Plenty of units rely on their abilities to give them extra defense against attacks, or evade incoming attacks, or punish bad attack rolls with counter-strikes, among other things. Dragon types ignore all of that and just attack the opponent. Sure, it doesn't boost their actual attack roll or anything, but negating so many abilities like this is a huge help. Now, onto the first of Pokemon's additional types. Dark types are super effective against ghost types and resistant to themselves. Their ability, Pursuit, is a hard counter to both the second type's ability and the ghost type's ability, further cementing them as a counter to those units. Pursuit not only boosts a dark type's leaving engagement attack to 2 dice, but it prevents figures from avoiding their leaving engagement attacks with abilities like Infiltrator, or the aptly named Disengage from classic HeroScape. The second additional type is Steel. Steel types are super effective against rock types and resistant to poison. Their ability, Iron Defense, helps to emulate Steel's ability to resist basically everything in the main games. When a Steel type is defending against a normal, unboosted attack, it gets an automatic shield in addition to whatever it rolls. This is the majority of attacks headed your way, though any figure can get around it simply by gaining height advantage over a Steel type. There are also multiple abilities we've gone over so far which override Iron Defense, the funniest being Mold Breaker. Now, Dragon types beat Steel types, despite Steel being the one thing that resisted them for nearly 20 years. Of course, that all changed with the addition of the Fairy type, the final type to discuss. Fairy is super effective against fighting types and resists Dragon types. Their ability, Prankster, lets them sacrifice their attack for the chance to move 3 extra spaces. This is a huge boost to mobility, however there are some caveats. Obviously, they can't attack on a turn where they use Prankster, but because this move takes place during the attack portion of their turn, it's separate from the move portion of their turn. For example, if a Fairy type has a move of 5 and gets to this 2-tile ledge with only 2 moves left, they can't add the Prankster boost to get over the ledge and keep moving. They have to end their movement, activate Prankster, then use their 3 moves to climb the ledge. This does limit how much a unit can get out of the Prankster boost, but this is still a really strong ability for setting up units early in the game. That's all the types and how they'll work in HeroScape. I'm sure you've noticed, but not all these types are created equal. Fire gets a very map-dependent buff to its movement, while Fairy gets a flat movement increase it can use on any map at any time. To account for this, each type will factor in differently to each character's point cost, with types like Dragon and Steel being more expensive than types like Bug or Ice. On that note, which Pokemon will be joining the battle of all time? I decided to go big on this. Sure, you could just add like 10 of the most popular Pokemon and call it a day, but I thought it'd be fun to take this idea and run with it. I've selected 6 Pokemon per region, all 9 of the mainline regions plus Hisui, for a total of 60 Pokemon. I gave myself a few rules to follow when selecting which Pokemon I'd include. These are totally optional, but I felt they promoted a more diverse selection. If your favorite didn't make the cut, they likely broke one of these rules, and I didn't feel like rearranging everything to make them fit. I designed these units to let players experience all the different strategies present in base HeroScape, while also keeping themselves distinct from existing characters. That way you still have your bonding pairs, your cheerleader units, your more powerful Dragon-esque figures, among other archetypes, without just copying and pasting what HeroScape's already done. Before we dive in, there's just one little thing I wanted to discuss with the handful of HeroScape fans watching. If you're just here for the Pokemon, skip to this timestamp. Don't worry, we'll catch up. We'll see you in a sec. Okay, now that it's just us here, I gotta level with you. None of this shit is play-tested. I know, you're supposed to actually try your characters out before posting them online, but I just have no one to play with. I tried to get my friend Parker to play, but she gnawed her arm off and made a run for it. It's not even like I trapped her or anything, she was just that desperate to get away from HeroScape. So take all this as less of a final product and more of a proof of concept. None of this is set in stone. I've made so many versions of these Pokemon, and even the types themselves just for fun. With that said, I'd absolutely love your feedback on anything you think is especially egregious. I don't want this to be a Marvel-level set where nothing is balanced for standard play. I'm hoping these characters could slot into our regular games without ruining everything. Okay, the Pokemon fans are coming back, just act natural. Oh, hey guys, welcome back. Don't worry, you didn't miss a really embarrassing confession or anything like that. Now that we're all here, let's start the rundown on each of these Pokemon and how they'll play in HeroScape. Charizard is a no-brainer inclusion, even for a Venusaur fanboy like me. I purposefully designed all the starters to be worth around 120 points, enough that they feel special but not ludicrously expensive. While Charizard has mostly average stats, its attack of 4 is solid, and it's surprisingly mobile thanks to its flying type. The real star here is Blast Burn. 7 attack dice is an insane damage output for any attack, let alone one with a range of 4. However, you're forced to remove an unrevealed order marker from Charizard if Blast Burn deals any damage, which hopefully should keep it from being too overwhelming. While you can remove the fake order marker and still have all of your remaining turns, you're giving up the element of surprise and allowing your opponent to better prepare for your moves in advance. And, as you'll see later, there are plenty of other characters in this Pokemon set and in the Age of Annihilation sets who would prefer to have that X order marker to activate their special abilities, meaning there's an explicit opportunity cost going for Blast Burn instead. Plus, Charizard can't use this attack again without giving up the third turn order marker, so it's not exactly spammable. I imagine Charizard will actually be at its best rushing into battle and using its normal attack, which is already above average and prone to height advantage thanks to Charizard's flying type. Blast Burn will mostly be a last resort, only to be fired off when Charizard is about to go down. Next is another instant inclusion, Pikachu. I want a Pikachu to be a glass cannon squad, hitting hard and fast but getting knocked out just as quickly. And while its measly 2 attack isn't a lot, its Electro Ball ability patches that up nicely. Whenever a Pikachu targets a figure with its normal attack, it adds dice to that attack based on how much faster Pikachu is compared to them. Since Pikachu has a move of 6, it'll be getting at least 1 extra attack die against most units. Of course, I had to cap how far this boost could go so Pikachu wouldn't nuke the Marrow Hive, but it's still quite strong against figures with slow or even average move values. Combined with extra dice for height advantage and super effective hits against flying types, Pikachu can start to dish out some crazy damage, especially since there's 3 of them attacking per turn. However, a lot of these boosts are situational. Without good positioning, and against figures with a better move or range, your Pikachu will start to falter. Lastly, as a small figure, Pikachu will have the obligatory climb ability. You'll see this pop up a lot in this set, given how many Pokemon are pocket-sized. It just lets these characters move without taking fall damage from a small ledge or getting stuck under the same small ledge. We're not done with the little yellow mascots yet, though. Up next is Psyduck. Most of the time, Psyduck is a bog-standard melee squad. However, its Confusion ability gives it a 30% chance to increase its range to 7 for a turn. This is based on its Pokédex entries, which state that it has psychic powers but cannot control them properly, so it only unlocks its hidden potential some of the time. A range of 7 and an attack of 3 is amazing on a squad in general, let alone a common squad you can recruit multiple of. Combined with the fact that there are 4 Psyduck per squad, you can start dishing out some serious damage when the range roll goes your way. And even if it doesn't, your opponent needs to take the risk of Psyduck's range into account when spacing their figures around them. This is kind of similar to the Tarn Viking Warriors. While their Berserker Charge gives them extra move, not range, both effectively increase these units' threat range for the turn. Psyduck's increased range lets it hit further away, while the Viking's increased move lets it run up to opponents. Confusion does give Psyduck a bigger increase to range, which is further amplified by Psyduck's higher move value than the Viking's, but Berserker Charge gives the Vikings a boost which doesn't disappear when your turn is over. Sure, they can't guarantee another charge will happen, but failing the Berserker Charge roll won't undo the extra movement they got on their last turn, so they can still pressure figures which they didn't destroy. Meanwhile, Psyduck needs to activate Confusion again if it wants to threaten the same figures, especially since its move is just too short to let it get into melee range against a figure exactly 7 spaces away. Obviously, Psyduck has better stats and a bonus ability compared to the Vikings, so it's quite a bit more expensive, but it's just funny how similar these two ended up. Next is the OG Rock Boy, Geodude. While at first it seems to suffer from low move and attack, Rollout helps to turn that low move into a high attack. When using a Geodude's normal attack, it adds 1 die for every space it moved prior to entering engagement this turn. Because a Geodude only moves 4 spaces and the last space will be it entering engagement, the most it can boost its attack by is 3. But a squad with an attack of 5 on the first turn is super scary for anyone they roll towards. Obviously, your opponent can play around Geodude by forcing them to climb up elevation, however, Rollout is also limited in how all or nothing it is. If your Geodude's initial barrage doesn't kill their target, they're left stranded. They can't activate Rollout again without risking a leaving engagement attack, and since each Geodude only has 1 life, a successful attack just destroys it. Even if a Geodude gets away unscathed, it only moving 4 spaces means every other figure can follow it on their next turn, preventing you from using Rollout again. Still, that initial high attack lends Geodude some destructive potential, even if it's situational, and afterwards they can keep themselves useful by pinning down the survivors with the threat of leaving engagement attacks while your other units pick them off. Going back to heroes, we have Gengar. Gengar is a cheeky sniper character. A move and range of 7 makes it hard to pin down, especially since it can run away without worrying about those pesky leaving engagement attacks. On smaller maps, Gengar might be useful as an early lead to rush your opponent's base and overwhelm them with attacks boosted by Dream Eater, which grants Gengar 2 extra attack dice against figures with no order markers on their cards. This allows it to pressure figures which your opponent might be saving for later in the game. Its poor defenses means it will get wiped pretty easily though, and it's a lot weaker later on when your opponent has less army cards to spread their order markers on, but it can still shoot off some pot shots if no one else is close enough. Last from Kanto is Snorlax. It was a toss-up if I wanted to include Eevee or Snorlax here. I ultimately went with Snorlax since Eevee felt kind of lacking without its evolutions, and including too many of those would eat through my monotypes super quick. Maybe Eevee could get a booster pack with it and its evolutions down the line. Back to Snorlax, its Heavy Slam attack lets it throw its weight around, dealing more damage the smaller the target. Heavy Slam starts with just one attack die, but adds dice to the roll for the difference between Snorlax's height and the target's. For good measure, Snorlax also gets an extra attack die against any small or medium figures it targets. Against the various squads with a height of 3, Heavy Slam hits 6 attack dice, which should be more than enough to let it take out any squad figure. All this is before Normalize lets Snorlax take advantage of things like height advantage and attack lifts for this attack. This is impressive strength, but is only crushing one squad unit at a time, and at 150 points it's a bit expensive for such an inefficient attacker. That's where Sleep Talk might come in handy. With Sleep Talk, anytime you reveal an order marker for a unit which isn't on the field, you can take that turn with Snorlax instead, provided it doesn't have any unrevealed order markers on its own card. So say you placed your second turn order marker on Pikachu, but by the time your second turn rolls around, your opponent has wiped all of them out. Snorlax can now take that turn instead, hopefully getting some value out of what would otherwise be a wasted turn. Between Snorlax's low move and the incentive to keep order markers off of its card, I picture Snorlax working best as a bouncer for your other units, moving slowly into position and sitting in the way of incoming attackers. They'll either have to take care of Snorlax first, while it just sits there and lets its teammate pick them off from afar, or go after the teammate first, but prepare for Snorlax to come after them once Sleep Talk activates. That's all the Kanto Pokemon we're adding. Let's see what Johto has in store. When picking the starters for each region, I quickly realized I'd be locked into at least 2 monotypes, since both Johto and Galar have no secondary types on any of their starters. And with Unova having several fire types way more popular than Emboar, I'd likely end up with 3 monotype starters. I landed on Meganium for Johto since I figured Cinderace was a lock and I wanted to include Wooper, but I could see these 3 starters being swapped around. In any case, these starters not having a second type makes them perfect to include a staple HeroScape ability, Bonding. With how important your order marker placement is and how devastating it can be to lose a turn when your figures get destroyed, getting to take 2 turns for the price of 1 is amazing. Meganium shows the defensive value of this ability, allowing it to get in position and set up both its Safeguard ability and the squad's Leaf Guard ability all at once. Safeguard gives all friendly grass types adjacent to Meganium an extra defense die, and with Leaf Guard shielding them from special abilities, these squads can be tough to take out next to Meganium. We'll go over how each grass squad will work with Meganium, and thus Meganium's playstyle, in their sections later in the video. Now for everyone's favorite Gen 2 Pokemon, which feels like a Gen 1 Pokemon. It's Togepi. Togepi is a meme unit. It can rush your opponents down with prankster boosted movement, then get engaged and stall their figures. You don't even have to put order markers on them after that. You can take the free turns to set up your own figures while your opponent tries to get rid of the Togepi. Should you choose to take more turns with Togepi though, you can try and get some cheese with Metronome. Picking a random character and letting Togepi use its ability can lead to some silly situations, like firing off a massive blast burn or teleporting further up the map. Of course, plenty of characters have abilities which don't really do anything on your own turn, like Meganium's Safeguard, or which don't do anything after you've already moved, like flying, so your mileage will vary. But honestly, Togepi likely won't use this ability a whole lot and just stick to bugging your opponent's figures. Togepi's value goes down once your opponent gets more of their pieces in position, but it can make for an effective opener. The last thing to note is that Togepi is a unique squad, as opposed to the common squads seen so far. While Metronome is gimmicky, you can play the odds much better if you have a whole swarm of Togepi ready to go. Forcing players to stick to just 3 of them helps prevent Metronome from winning by attrition. Up next is Ampharos. It's a standard bulky ranged figure with the added bonus of providing some team support for itself and other attackers. Tying into Ampharos' role as the lighthouse Pokemon in Olivine City, its ability Flash lets it shine a light on nearby enemy figures, shutting down any special abilities they might use to dodge your attacks. It's similar to the Moldbreaker ability for dragon types, which is fitting considering Ampharos turns into a dragon when it Mega Evolves. Make some noise, it's Wooper time! On most maps, Wooper is an average range squad, but nothing special. On maps with lots of water though, Wooper can be a surprisingly annoying squad to get rid of. Its muddy water ability gives it some useful evasion, preventing faraway enemies from targeting it with a normal attack while it's on a water tile. Most figures can't move through the water like they can, and forcing figures to get adjacent will put them in a bad position, even if they destroy the Wooper. However, in the water, most Wooper will be attacking at a height disadvantage, and while special attacks won't get height advantage, most will be strong enough to wipe out a Wooper, if not the whole squad at once. Muddy water will likely not be effective as a long-term camping option for Wooper, but instead as a shield, allowing it to rush into battle before leaving the water and regaining some height. It wouldn't be Johto without the two new types it added, Dark and Steel. Here to rep the latter is Scizor. Technician is a seemingly simple ability, but it's secretly busted. Whenever Scizor rolls 2 or less skulls for its normal attack, each skull rolled counts as 2. One of the biggest flaws for melee hero figures is that you can put a lot of work into getting them in position, but just have one bad attack roll and end up wasting all that effort. Giving yourself a failsafe against most bad rolls is actually really powerful. It takes Scizor's average attack roll from 2 skulls to just under 3. Sure, you still have to worry about rolling no skulls, but that's less than what other melee figures have to deal with. There have been plenty of figures in Classic HeroScape which double their skulls when attacking, but they're typically restricted to only 2 attack dice. While Technician doesn't ramp with further boost to Scizor's attack like those abilities do, it makes Scizor a very consistent source of damage. Scizor also has help closing the gap on its enemies with its Steel type, giving it protection against unboosted attacks, though on most maps a ranged figure should be able to take height and negate that. And as Scizor reps the Steel type, we have Tyranitar to rep the Dark type. Tyranitar is an absolute unit, nearly reaching the level of dragons from Classic HeroScape. The main draw here is Sandstorm. This is basically 2 abilities in one, both shielding Tyranitar and figures adjacent to it from ranged normal attacks, while also having a 35% chance to wound any figure adjacent to Tyranitar after it attacks. It's like Sergeant Drake's Thorian Speed and Kimoshi's Toxic Skin rolled into one. Forcing figures to get close to it in order to use their normal attacks shuts down a lot of ranged squads, and then punishing them for getting close with potential chip damage is brutal. However, plenty of heroes can still use their special attacks to target it, but more interestingly, Sandstorm affects all figures, not just your opponents. An enemy adjacent to Tyranitar is shielded from your own ranged attacks, and your figures are prone to Sandstorm chip damage if they're beside Tyranitar. I picture Tyranitar as a mid to late game unit, coming out once your opponent's heroes with ranged special attacks are either weakened or destroyed, and forcing your opponent to approach it. With that, we've covered all of Johto's reps. Let's move on to Hoenn. Usually, picking between the 3 Hoenn starters is a tough call, but I felt Blaziken was a shoo-in for HeroScape. We have enough monotype starters, so Sceptile didn't work, and I wanted to include both Flygon and Wooper, who clash with Swampert's typing, so Blaziken it is. The Blaze Kick and Chicken isn't just a movie connoisseur, it's also a high-risk, high-reward powerhouse. High Jump Kick is a special attack with a range of 1 and an attack of 6, which is pretty powerful. However, if High Jump Kick fails to wound the targeted figure, Blaziken takes 2 hits of recoil damage. This attack is just strong enough that it feels reliable, but not so strong that it's guaranteed to work. And losing a third of your health on a bad roll is scary, but this can be mitigated by being careful who you target with this attack. A small, squishy squad with a defense of 2? Sounds like a free hit. A bulky 4 defense hero with height advantage and an evasion ability? Just stick to the normal attack for now. I think the biggest hurdle Blaziken has is competing with Charizard, whose downside is less kicking you while you're down and more holding you back when you're winning. Plus, its movement is way better with flying. However, Blaziken does have a much greater snowball potential, and its fighting type helps it take on foes too boosted up to be threatened by its cheesy special attack. Next is Pokemon's leading lady, Gardevoir. Looking at the raw stats, it seems like Gardevoir would just be a worse Gengar. Same range, attack, and bulk, but worse move. Plus, it has no Dream Eater to boost its attack. However, Gardevoir's typing gives it 2 fantastic movement abilities. You can teleport up to 7 spaces, matching Gengar's great move and even its invulnerability to leaving engagement attacks. Or it can use Prankster to move an extra 3 spaces, bumping its move up to 8 and allowing it to climb elevation, unlike Teleport. Sure, Gengar can move 7 spaces and still attack afterwards, but these abilities let Gardevoir keep up while also having niche uses, like bypassing hazardous terrain with Teleport. Plus, Gardevoir's Psybeam special attack gives it some extra firepower. allowing it to keep using this attack over and over again until it doesn't deal any damage with it. This lets Gardevoir whittle down multiple figures in one turn, should your attack rolls go the way you want. The choice between Gardevoir and Gengar, I think, comes down to power versus coverage. Gengar has the power advantage, getting +2 attack on figures without order markers and a chance to deal extra poison damage on hit. Gardevoir has better coverage, with Psybeam potentially wiping out multiple figures or even an entire squad in one turn. Gengar is better suited to attacking bulky heroes, Gardevoir is better suited to attacking frail squads. And of course, being so similar to Gengar, Gardevoir shares its weaknesses. Namely, its frailty means it's prone to wiping to a single bad defense roll, or concentrated attacks from a bunch of squad figures. But hey, that's the risk you take running a glass cannon, or in Gardevoir's case, a glass Gatling gun.
Going from fairies to dragons, we have Flygon. I avoided giving dual types 2 abilities up to this point, because with their types abilities they'd have 4 special powers. This was very rare in the classic HeroScape, basically limited to the hilariously overpowered Marvel figures and this one vampire chick whose 4th ability just kills her. They've since added some normal figures with 4 abilities, so I'm not completely against it, but it needs to be done sparingly. I mostly did it for Flygon because it feels wrong to not give it Levitate, allowing it to hover over hazardous terrain and avoid fall damage, but it feels kind of lacking with just Levitate. Fissure is anything but lacking though. Instead of attacking, Flygon can roll the 20-sided die for each small and medium figure next to it, destroying them if it rolls 5 for squads or a 17 for heroes. Fissure gives Flygon the ability to wipe out multiple characters at once, especially squad figures. It's sort of a combination of Grimnack's Chomp and Braxis' Poisonous Acid Breath, both of which are extremely potent abilities in classic HeroScape. Flygon gets better odds to destroy a squad figure than Braxis does, while targeting more figures per turn than Grimnack. However, Flygon also misses out on Braxis' range and Grimnack's better odds. It also has a unique drawback in that it targets your own figures as well, meaning you might be forced to give up a Fissure opportunity to preserve an important ally. Still, Levitate gives Flygon better mobility than Grimnack and has a much lower point cost than Braxis. Plus, its ground and dragon typing gives it some added heft to its normal attack when going for Fissure isn't worth it. So I think it has its place among the squad killers. Can you believe I picked a type change in normal type from Hoenn and didn't pick Kecleon? My apologies to all of the Mystery Dungeon fans in the audience. Anyway, here's Cast Form. Forecast allows Cast Form to change into a water, fire, or ice type by moving onto the terrain those types interact with, though it will return to normal on any other type of terrain. I felt Cast Form's gimmick was more intuitive than Kecleon's, essentially granting it the terrain bonuses that water, fire, and ice types get all at once, while also allowing it to change what type of coverage it has. And unlike a dual type, it does not attack with 2 types at once, meaning you can get rid of a not very effective type in exchange for a super effective type. Outside of that, there's not much to write home about in terms of the stats, but having 4 Cast Form per squad is very handy. Next is the first ever edgy OC Pokemon, Absol. Absol just narrowly snagged the Mono Dark Spot from Zoroark, though both are very lucky Umbreon was waiting for an all-EV expansion pack. Absol's main shtick is sensing disasters in advance, which isn't quite what Future Sight does, but shut up. Future Sight works differently than most attacks, allowing you to target any character on the board, but only dealing damage if that figure gets close to Absol on your opponent's next turn. The attack of 5 is great, especially for an attack you don't even need to see your opponent to use, but the drawback of being easily dodgeable makes it less of a real attack for Absol and more a way to apply pressure to the opponent's figures. Melee figures need to risk a big hit as they approach Absol, which can encourage them to leave it alone for the time being. This, in turn, will help Absol enter engagement on its own turn and get the advantage in those skirmishes. Of course, this doesn't really do anything to help Absol versus ranged figures, but on maps with good cover, or late game when most ranged units have been taken care of, Absol can be a really bad omen for those around it. Last from Hoenn is Spheal, who is just a silly little guy. Sure, it's a decent enough melee unit, but Psyduck has the same stats plus an extra figure. No, Spheal is better off making use of its Encore ability. Instead of attacking with any Spheal, you can take the 50-50 chance to move your opponent's order marker for their next turn onto a character near one of your Spheal. Forcing your opponent to spend a turn on a character might do nothing, since they were already planning on taking that turn with them, or it could completely screw up their game plan this round. The biggest issue Spheal faces is just that it's too slow to target figures which aren't already out on the field, meaning the ones it can target are likely out where your opponents want them to be anyway. But just having this ability could pressure your opponent into delegating their turns differently at the start of each round, which is a very powerful mind game. The best case scenario is having your Spheal close enough to an opponent's cheerleader unit like Raylan. Forcing your opponent to spend their turn on Raylan not only prevents them from using the figure Raylan is supporting, but she can't fly over and start attacking your Spheal without altering the range she's lending support to.
which could leave her allies vulnerable. This is another unique squad, and the set's first support-type squad. Encore would be toxic with a swarm of Spheal that refuses to die, and honestly just having 3 of them should be enough to disrupt your opponent's game plan. That's going to be it for the 3rd generation of Pokemon. Now that Hoenn's a-goin', let's say hello to Sinnoh. Like Blaziken, the Sinnoh starter was chosen by process of elimination. It was really simple. Lucario is a shoo-in. Infernape and Empoleon each share a type with Lucario. Welcome to the squad, Torterra. Still, it's always been my favorite Sinnoh starter, so I'm not exactly complaining. Torterra is a monster in melee combat. The ground type's ability to target everyone around it, combined with the grass type's ability to heal a wound for every figure it destroys, gives it the potential to outlast basically any melee squad, and its stellar bulk combined with Stomping Tantrum ensures it will win most prolonged battles. Stomping Tantrum is an ability which raises Torterra's attack every time it fails to deal damage, whether an attack is defended, evaded, or negated. This attack boost only lasts until Torterra successfully deals damage, but it continues to ramp until that happens, and Torterra is bulky enough to wait until its attack is high enough to break through the target. It's completely blanked by range figures though, and while it's not tortoise slow, it's not exactly able to chase after other figures, especially ones with extra mobile abilities. You'll need other figures to handle snipers, then you can count on Torterra to handle most close quarters combatants. Now it's time for Starly, the most iconic Route 1 bird. Yes, even more than Pidgey. Double Team lets the Starly player move twice as many Starly in a turn as normal, at the expense of the X order marker and their attack on that turn. This kind of ability has been seen before in HeroScape, but never on a flying character, so the previously mentioned limitations were important to clip its wings.
Please clap.
Starly's main use will be to rush out and pin down your opponent's figures, forcing them to waste time attacking them or risk-taking leaving engagement attacks. It shares this playstyle with Togepi. Both have different mobility advantages, so the choice between the two will likely come down to which you can afford to include in your army. I already said it'd be here, so it's no surprise, but Lucario's up next. Being one of Game Freak's golden children, Lucario gets a lot of tools to work with in the Pokemon games, so I decided to give it an ability reflecting that versatility. Aura Sphere lets Lucario exchange its range for more attack power, while also letting it use its normal attack 3 times if it remains unboosted. While an attack of 2 is paltry, being able to use it 3 times gives it some counterplay against squad figures. But if you want to land some bigger hits, all you have to do is get Lucario a bit closer. At 5 spaces away, Lucario's back to a more average 3 attack. At 3 spaces, it has 4 attack, the highest most ranged figures have, and up close, it reaches 5 attack for big melee hits. Despite the power this provides, Lucario will probably be at its best using no boosts in melee range thanks to Brick Break. 3 attacks of 2 are okay, but 3 attacks of 3 where one of the dice is guaranteed to be a skull can really put the pressure on your opponent. And if you're up against a figure with 2 defense or less, meaning Brick Break won't activate, 3 attacks is statistically going to land at least 1 wound. The main thing holding Lucario back in this regard is that the ability prevents you from adding any dice to your roll when you multi-attack, not just dice provided by Aura Sphere. This means you need to sacrifice height advantage and possibly type advantage to get the multi-hit, making this already weak attack even more limp. The closest comparison to Lucario is probably Agent Carr. Not only do they have the same stat spread, but Carr's Sword of Reckoning gives him a similar boost to melee attacks. Lucario trades the extra die up close for extra dice at different ranges, but the ability to attack 3 times definitely edges Aura Sphere above Sword of Reckoning. Combined with Brick Break and the extra bulk provided by Iron Defense, Lucario is definitely worth a bit more than Vidar's right-hand man. Now for one of my admittedly more random picks, we have Skorupi. While deciding who I'd add to HeroScape, it was hard finding bug types which were both small enough to work as a squad and yet not entirely wimpy. Skorupi fills this role nicely, and it can be a surprisingly scary option. Venoshock gives Skorupi an automatic skull when using a boosted attack. With just the extra die from height advantage, a Skorupi will be getting a free skull on top of its now 4 attack dice, and if all 3 are boosted, that's a lot of damage for one little squad. And that's before factoring in boosts like Glyph's or Finn's Warrior's attack aura. And while as a squad their chance for inflicting poison damage isn't very high, having a bunch of roided up Skorupi in a barrage makes that low chance ever more likely to proc. When Skorupi doesn't get its boosts though, they're nothing special, meaning they're reliant on the right circumstances to truly shine. Sinnoh is famous for adding tons of new evolutions to old Pokemon, and I went with one of my favorites, Weavile. Weavile is an absolute bastard, man. Its foul play ability turns its opponent's bad luck against it, adding another skull to Weavile's attack roll for every blank die an opponent rolls in defense. An attack of 4 is already decent, and foul play just makes it all the more potent. Still, Weavile is incredibly frail, and though it has a high move value, it doesn't have any defense against ranged attacks. But if you can hide it behind cover, it will be a fun assassin unit, hunting down isolated figures and picking them off before their allies can back them up. Last is the best legendary who's not actually a legendary. It's Rotom. Rotom's gimmick in the main games is its form changing, allowing it to take on different coverage. While each of the cast form's different forms could be easily tied to different terrain, it wasn't so simple for Rotom, so I took a different approach. Eerie Impulse allows Rotom to target an opponent up to 6 spaces away, and if you roll a 16 or higher, you can copy any ability from that figure's card. While that might be a bit more complicated compared to cast form's form change, this lets Rotom possess other figures and borrow their abilities, like how it gains new attacks in each of its forms. It's gimmicky, and Rotom will likely stick to being a run-and-gun type of hero, but it can open up some funny plays. That's it for Sinnoh. Now we go on to Unova. Starting off Unova is the water otter, Samurott. I mean, it's a sea lion now, but it was an otter before, whatever. On its own, Samurott is really a bog-standard melee attacker. Razor Shell is nice, being a melee attack of 4, which ignores most defense boosts on the target, but that's not enough to make Samurott more than mediocre, even compared to its fellow monotype starters. However, its advantage over them is having the most options to bond with, having 3 water squads compared to just 2 grass and 1 fire. Samurott's viability will either live or die based on how helpful its bonded squad is, so let's go over each of them and what they provide to Samurott. Psyduck has the advantage in sheer numbers, and while it has a chance to have ranged attacks, I think its strength will come in playing it as a melee attacker. Wooper is a far more reliable ranged option, though obviously it has less power per unit. Spheal is the most volatile, providing great disruption with its Encore ability, but on poor rolls or bad picks for Encore, it is strictly inferior to Psyduck. Each of these helps Samurott counter different foes, and I think the best pick will come down to personal preference or playstyle. Regardless, Samurott should stand back in a fight, relying on these squads to weaken the opponent before it goes in for the kill. Next is the gooeyest boy to ever do it, Reuniclus. For the most part, Reuniclus is a pretty standard ranged attacker. The extra health is nice, but that defense stat leaves a lot to be desired. However, the simplicity of its Magic Guard ability makes it super valuable. Reuniclus will not take damage or be destroyed by anything which isn't a direct attack. Poison damage?
Not this time.
Counterattacks?
It never happened.
A 50-tile drop, normally fatal to any character without a lucky d20 roll?
It's a total fabrication.
On their own, these situations are pretty niche, but having a blanket immunity to all of them makes Reuniclus weirdly bulky, just like Magic Guard in the main games. Coupled with Teleport to boost its movement and dodge leaving engagement attacks, Reuniclus can be a tough character to take down. It is a bit weak offensively for a figure of its point value, but with how durable it is, Reuniclus typically has more turns to fire off attacks than other units. I had to neuter it a bit though. Giving a character with range this high the ability to camp on lava tiles would have been toxic. We're now getting to our first grass-type squad. Let's talk about Ferroseed. And buckle up, this is a big one. Ferroseed is the Pokemon equivalent of the Samurai figures, having the ability to turn its defense into offense with its Counter-Strike ability Iron Barbs. When Ferroseed defends against a normal attack from an adjacent figure, any extra shields Ferroseed rolls will deal damage to the attacker. Comparing it to the Izumi Samurai, the simplest samurai unit in HeroScape, Ferroseed trades 2 defense dice for a guaranteed shield against most attacks, which lowers how many skulls you can block but gives you more consistency against low rolls. It can also make itself immune to special abilities if it is adjacent to another grass type, meaning figures like Flygon can't bypass Iron Barbs with their abilities like they can to the Samurai. Plus, it's a common squad, so you can draft multiple units compared to just the one Izumi. All this in exchange for 1 move, and it's clear they need their significantly higher point total. This is before mentioning that they can bond with Meganium. Meganium's stat spread lends it to being a bulky attacker, sitting on height and raining fire on units trying to approach it. It appreciates having Ferroseed as little bodyguards against incoming melee units, and the Ferroseed each enjoy the extra defense and immunity to special abilities. Once Meganium and its Ferroseed guards are in position, it can then move the remaining Ferroseed out in the field in front of it, creating a minefield of leaving engagement attacks your opponent will have to navigate to try and threaten Meganium. Unfortunately, this is similar to an existing team format, Major Q9 plus the Death Reavers. The Death Reavers would rush forward both on their own turns and when activating their Scatter ability, which let 2 of them move 4 spaces every time a Death Reaver defended against a normal attack, even if the attack was successful. This formed a wall of units which engaged enemy figures and were difficult to navigate through. Major Q9 would then rain fire down from behind his rat horde and chip away at the helpless enemy, either with his Quaglix gun special attack, letting him attack anywhere from 3 to 9 times in one turn, or his normal attack when the extra power or range was needed. This strategy was so dominant and easy to play that when Age of Annihilation was released, they each got their points raised significantly, along with their frequent accomplice Raylan. This raises some concerns about the Meganium Ferroseed core. The former is half of Q9's current price, and still significantly cheaper than his original cost of 180. And while a squad of Ferroseed is double the original Death Reaver price, it brings a lot of benefits the rats never had. Iron Barbs makes each Ferroseed riskier to take on, and Meganium's bonding means they can attack without taking up your order markers, even after getting into position. How is this not just the Q9 Reavers team, but better? Well, the biggest nerf is Meganium itself. While it's a fine unit, it's certainly no Q9. There's a reason it's half the price. Its offensive output is much lower, with its sole attack comparable to 1/3 of Quaglix gun. While the bonding with Ferroseed can give it up to 3 additional attack rolls, they're limited by which characters each of your Ferroseed is close to, and where on the board they want to cover. Getting 3 of your Ferroseed on one turn to engage with a figure can leave a path open for another to come and threaten Meganium, whose bulk is also far worse than Q9's. Meganium's shortcomings wouldn't be as much of a hindrance if it wasn't for the second issue. Ferroseed doesn't have the sheer coverage the rats have. Just looking at a single squad each of Death Reavers and Ferroseed, the rats already have them outnumbered 4 to 3, despite Ferroseed costing more. As you buy more units, that discrepancy will keep growing. It only costs 180 points to get 12 Death Reavers even with their increased cost. Meanwhile, it costs 320 points to get the same number of Ferroseed, almost double the price. And while Iron Barbs is handy, the rats are far better suited to this role. They get in position much quicker, both with their higher move and with Scatter activating anytime one of them is attacked. They also have Disengage, letting them reposition without risking a leaving engagement attack. Iron Barb's chip damage only activates against attacks from adjacent figures, whereas Scatter works against attacks from any figure. Sure, each individual Ferroseed puts up more of a fight than each individual rat, but the point of this archetype is that the squads are meant to be a meat shield for the big unit. The Horde is thinner and the Powerhouse is less powerful, which should hopefully keep this team comp less aggravating than the original. One last comparison. In a standard 500-point game, you'll have enough for Meganium plus 4 squads of Ferroseed, but you'll only be able to get 3 if you want another support like Raylan. For the rebalanced Q9 Reavers team, you can also get 4 squads of rats, though in order to make room for Raylan, you'd actually need to lower it all the way down to 2 squads. This actually makes the numbers pretty comparable, having 8 rats to 9 Ferroseed, meaning Meganium and Ferroseed might be better with Raylan support, while Q9 Reavers work better when sticking to just the core, or paired with a less expensive support figure. Going from defense squad to offense hero, it's Haxorus. Like Ash's Charizard in the anime, Haxorus won't bother with a figure unless it thinks they're a worthy foe. Rivalry will increase Haxorus' attack against figures with a cost value higher than its own, but will lower its attack against units with a cheaper cost. An attack of 5 is already amazing, and bumping it up to 7 makes Haxorus a monster for most important figures. However, Haxorus isn't really standing out in any other area, so dropping its attack down to a measly 3 against cheaper foes leaves it with nothing to do. Haxorus is especially vulnerable to getting swarmed by squad figures, since most will be cheaper than 110 points and require multiple turns to get rid of. But with the right positioning, Haxorus can absolutely blitz through your opponent's strongest figures. Next up is Golett. Poltergeist gives each Golett an additional attack die for every special power the targeted figure has. This means each Golett actually has a base attack of 3, since every character has at least one special power, and is likely hitting 4 against most targets. In this Pokemon collection specifically, the large amount of dual-type Pokemon means each Golett is regularly hitting 5 attack dice. There are 2 things holding Golett back: its below-average move of 4, and its small squad size of 2 members. It at least has above-average defense, so it has some help closing in on opponents, but losing even one of them to a bad roll will undo a lot of progress. Still, if you're able to get both of your Golett next to a figure with mucho texto, you can pretty reliably chunk them down, if not destroy them outright. Last is the Queen Bee of Unova, Volcarona. This is a potentially scary card. Its Quiver Dance ability will boost Volcarona's move, attack, and defense for the rest of the round, in exchange for the X order marker and its attack on the turn it uses Quiver Dance. After a boost, Volcarona has basically no weak points. Not to mention, it's expected for figures to burn turns in order to get close to their opponents, but Quiver Dance helps Volcarona ensure none of its turns are wasted. If it's not close enough to attack, it'll take that time to boost up and prepare itself for the rest of the round. Something worth noting though is that not only can it not attack on the turn it Quiver Dances, but it can't take advantage of that increased move either, since Quiver Dance takes place during the attack portion of your turn. That means you'll only have 2 turns to take advantage of the increased move and attack, and if you lose the initiative roll at the start of the round, the same is true of that defense boost. It's kind of like the opposite of Charizard's Blast Burn, where instead of sacrificing a turn after a successful attack, you sacrifice a turn in advance to give yourself a turn or 2 of extra power. That means you're incentivized to put all your order markers on Volcarona, which obviously reduces your turn flexibility quite a bit. Even if you dedicate just one of your other turns to using Volcarona and have the last order marker on another card, needing to sacrifice the X order marker to set up Quiver Dance makes it obvious to your opponent what your plan is, so they can prepare accordingly. Plus, Volcarona will suffer if relied on too heavily. If your opponent focuses their units on it, then it can be difficult to find another turn to boost up again, making it much easier to handle. I imagine Volcarona will do best in the late game, when there are less figures in your army competing for order markers and less enemy units to pressure it while it sets up. It can be quite potent in this role, but you'll be reliant on your other units to soften up the enemy for you, which can be daunting given how many points Volcarona eats up. If they're unsuccessful, then Volcarona needs to take out most of the enemy army by itself, a tall task with only 2 attacks every round. With that, we finished the 5th generation of Pokemon, and we are on to the 6th. First from Kalos is 2-time champ of the most popular Pokemon poll, Greninja. Fittingly for the Ninja archetype, it's a speedy ranged attacker with subpar bulk. Greninja's special attack, Water Shuriken, has a range of 6 and an attack of 2, and can hit up to 5 times in one turn, but only if the initial attack damages its target. The only other characters which can attack that many times in one turn are Major Q9 and the Maro drones, but requiring the first hit to land in order to unlock the other 4 is a major downside, especially for an attack this weak. Still, you can always put the odds in your favor by targeting your opponent's weaker characters first, and in cases where there are no weak characters nearby, Greninja's normal attack is much more reliable. Greninja is good at rushing in and hitting the opponent before they're ready, though it'll want to do so from height to prevent the survivors from running forward and pinning it down. Next is Florges. I wanted to include a cheerleader type character among all the Pokemon I chose, and I think Florges fits this role nicely. This is a reimagining of one of the best powers in classic HeroScape, the original Raylan's defensive aura. That ability gave all friendly figures within 4 spaces of Raylan 2 extra defense dice, and despite 3 more versions of Raylan down the road, none come close to the utility original Raylan provides. It's common to include Raylan in your army and never spend a turn on her, since your sniper units can set up camp close enough to her starting position. Rather than passively buffing everyone's defense in a certain range, Lucky Chant allows Florges to reveal the X order marker when one of her allies is attacked. Lucky Chant will boost that figure's defense by letting them count each shield they roll as 2, but only for the remainder of that turn. This ability can reach up to 10 spaces away, over double the range of defensive aura, though it no longer passively affects every character in that area. This may help your figure survive one crucial turn, but it won't help them throughout the rest of the round. And of course, if your opponent is using a squad, they can simply start targeting another figure and ignore the Lucky Chant boost. Despite the stronger effect of Lucky Chant and Florges' increased bulk, I think she will be largely outclassed by the original Raylan. Still, with the new rules updating Raylan to also be 125 points, there may be some teams which appreciate Florges' extra range, both on her ability and her normal attack. Up next is Esper. Psyshock allows an Esper to swap a figure's defense stat with their total life value when using its normal attack against them. This basically boils down to Esper killing a ton of squads, given they almost always only have 1 life point. It doesn't do much against most heroes, but its strength against squad units is not to be underestimated. Even with 1 attack to 1 defense, it has a 1/3 chance to kill a squad, and that's before Esper takes advantage of things like height advantage and type matchups. With just 1 boost, an Esper has a 50-50 chance of killing any given squad, and with 3 of them attacking at once, you're almost guaranteed to get a kill. And while agility doesn't give Esper any additional movement distance like teleport does, letting all 3 of your Esper dodge leaving engagement attacks can be worth sacrificing your attack for the turn, especially if you can position them so your opponent isn't able to pin down all 3 again. However, Esper is still vulnerable to getting outranged by some squads, and others have evasive abilities which bypass Psyshock altogether. But if you're fighting an army with a heavy focus on squad figures, a few squads of Esper might be a big help. While Esper's ability was beautiful in its simplicity, the next unit is a little more complicated. Heliolisk is another Mucho Texto card. Solar Power gives Heliolisk a doubled attack when it stands within 4 spaces of a friendly fire-type figure, though it will take a wound every time it attacks. This is a fun ability, giving Heliolisk a big boost to its damage output at the cost of its health. It also requires you to keep a fire-type figure close to it, so you either have to hold one of your squad figures back, or you need to get a second hero close to Heliolisk. However, it felt like Heliolisk wasn't really using its normal type for anything, so I decided to give it a special attack, Parabolic Charge. Parabolic Charge is a melee attack of 3, and every wound Heliolisk inflicts on the target will be healed from itself. This leads to some interesting synergies. The most obvious is Parabolic Charge healing the wounds caused by solar power, but you can even use Parabolic Charge like a normal attack, meaning it also gets the boost from solar power. And if it successfully damages the opponent, you can even heal back the damage you previously gave yourself. You even heal before solar power wounds you, so you'll never be destroyed if Parabolic Charge does damage. The chance to activate static is the cherry on top, potentially allowing you to heal up again next turn without the target having a chance to strike back. Heliolisk does suffer from lackluster bulk, however, and since solar power is automatic, it can be put in awkward situations where it might kill itself just by attacking, or else need to give up an advantageous position to avoid the recoil damage. But I can see Heliolisk being a menace with the right support. Next up is Aurorus. Honestly, Aurorus is already solid as just a bulky ranged attacker, but Snow Warning makes it even more influential, allowing Aurorus to turn a tile and all the spaces around it into snow and ice tiles at the start of each round. Having the ability to freeze over a chunk of terrain and hinder characters trying to approach you is amazing, especially since it's automatic. On top of that, as the only ranged rock type, it can shut down flying figures from afar with Smackdown, which also prevents them from flying over its snow. If there is any big issue with Aurorus, it's just that it's a bit lacking on its own. Average move on a figure this large means it can be difficult moving Aurorus across the map, and unlike fellow large characters like Major Q9 or Johto, it isn't quite hitting the destructive power needed to justify shuffling it around. Not to mention, the snow it leaves isn't too hard to move around if it's just out in the open, and ranged figures can ignore it altogether. And while Aurorus' ability to set snow on the field can be a big help to its fellow ice types, it's pretty expensive as a support figure. Still, Aurorus doesn't have too much going against it. The main issue around drafting Aurorus is just whether you think those points would be better spent elsewhere. Last from Kalos is Noibat. Like the other support-focused squads, Spheal, Noibat is a unique squad, with its Tailwind being strong enough with just one unit of Noibat in an army. Tailwind allows any small or medium-friendly figures moving from a space adjacent to Noibat to ignore any elevations up to 3 tiles high. While that might sound very specific, it's very common, with most units being small or medium, and most heights rarely exceeding 4 tiles. On maps where elevation pops up farther away from player spawn points, Noibat can struggle to help its teammates much. But on maps where Noibat starts closer to height, it becomes much more effective. This not only reduces the risk of it or its teammate getting sniped before Tailwind activates, but also increases the chance of multiple figures getting a chance to use Tailwind across several turns. Plus, since Noibat is a squad, you can create a staircase on certain map structures, with a Noibat at different heights to boost your other figures on 3 different levels. These guys don't have a lot to do after they get their teammates in position, but their high move can allow them to pin down enemies for your other figures to start picking at with the height Noibat granted them. One last thing to note is Dragon Flying is a really good offensive typing, allowing a unit to rush in quickly over uneven terrain and attack without worrying about a target's ability. Giving this typing to a squad is especially interesting, though I feel Noibat's poor attack and even worse bulk will prevent them from seeing much offensive play, but they might be able to put some pressure on the opponent once they're done helping your other figures move up. Now that we've gotten through Kalos' picks, let's see what we've got from Alola. If it's good enough for Smash, it's good enough for Valhalla. Alola's starter is Incineroar. Despite being a big macho wrestling cat, it actually plays the most like Swarm of the Morrow Raylan. Rather than buffing your figure's defense, Incineroar's Intimidate lowers the attack of all enemy units within 7 spaces of it by 1. While the range for Intimidate is larger than that of either of the Raylan defense buffs, it is strictly worse for team support. A figure boosted by Raylan is buffed against attacks from anywhere on the map, whereas a friendly figure only benefits from Intimidate if Incineroar is able to see the enemy. Plus, the defense auras boost a figure's defense against all attacks, normal and special, whereas Intimidate only lowers normal attacks. Still, while this ability is less useful for team support, it is better for supporting Incineroar directly. Incineroar can spend most of the game sitting beside a figure who appreciates the weakened normal attacks, then rush out when it's needed elsewhere and still benefit from its Intimidate. The other comparison to Swarm of the Morrow Raylan is Darkest Lariat, which is a buffed version of Whirlwind Assault. Incineroar can either use Darkest Lariat to strike each figure adjacent to it once, like Whirlwind Assault, or get 3 attacks on the same figure in 1 turn. Other than that, Incineroar trades Raylan's flying and extra move point for buff damage on lava field tiles and a better leaving engagement attack. Overall, Swarm of the Morrow Raylan is still superior for strictly defensive purposes, even if she herself is outclassed by Rise of the Valkyrie Raylan, but Incineroar blends some of that defensive use with the ability to play more aggressively if needed. We're going from cats to dogs with the next unit, Rockruff. Remember SOS battles from Sun and Moon? Rockruff brings them to Heroscape, with its Howl ability helping to turn the tide against stronger foes. When one of your Rockruff rolls defense dice against an adjacent enemy, you can move 2 nearby Rockruff 2 spaces beside the attacker. Then, on your turn, it will be easier to retaliate now that the reinforcements have arrived. And if a Rockruff damages the target, they won't be able to use any abilities to run away, leaving even slippery figures like the Ghost types and Psychic types open to taking multiple leaving engagement attacks should they try to retreat. However, they don't really do much against figures with range, so unless they can sneak up on your opponent's snipers, they'll need help from your other units. It's the cutest little guy who just wants to snuggle forever, Mimikyu. Disguise is a great ability, preventing Mimikyu from taking more than 1 point of damage when it is at full health. This can either give Mimikyu more leeway when approaching ranged figures, or let it tank a big hit from a melee figure. And if Mimikyu can destroy its target, it can use Draining Kiss to heal a wound off of itself, which can reactivate Disguise if you're quick enough. I'm pretty sure that's not how it works in the actual games, but I don't care. Mimikyu's biggest hurdle is bad attack rolls. If it can't destroy its opponent quickly, it's susceptible to taking more damage, which makes it harder to reactivate Disguise. And while its Ghost Fairy typing makes it really good at running away, it needs to get close again to do anything, which will be harder without Disguise active. Those astute members of the audience might also notice that Mimikyu is a medium 4, even though it's supposed to be imitating Pikachu, who is a small 3. This is mainly due to the fact that I did not want to give this card 5 abilities, even if one of them is just Climb, but for lore we can pretend this is a Totem Mimikyu or something. Next up is Drampa. For most of the game, Drampa is going to pick off approaching figures with its ranged normal attacks, and it's already really solid in this role with its Dragon typing negating other figures' defensive abilities. However, should your opponent send a horde of figures at you all at once, or a hero which can withstand Drampa's normal attacks, Hyper Beam allows you to overpower their units with its sheer power and map coverage. Hyper Beam is an attack of 6 with a range of 8, but rather than target a single figure, it will blast 8 tiles in a straight line from Drampa. This means all figures on these spaces, yours and your opponent's, will have to defend against this monster of an attack. Like Blast Burn, you'll have to sacrifice an unrevealed order marker to use this attack. Despite being slightly weaker than Blast Burn initially, Hyper Beam can quickly surpass it. Because Drampa is a normal type, it can use Hyper Beam like a normal attack, meaning it will be boosted by height advantage while still negating evasion abilities like Sandstorm and attack lowering abilities like Intimidate thanks to Moldbreaker. And of course, it affects multiple characters at once, letting you wipe out half an army in an instant if the stars align for you. Your opponent can still play around Hyper Beam by just not lining their figures up single file, and without that destructive power, Drampa can sometimes feel a little too expensive, but with the right map and your other figures' support, you can use the threat of Hyper Beam to force your opponent to make different plays, if not nuke them outright. It wouldn't be Alola without the regional forms, and we're starting things off with Alolan Raichu, another bonding hero. Surge Surfer lets Raichu take a turn with one of your electric-type squads before it takes a turn of its own. Right now, the only electric squad is Pikachu, which is fitting, even if it limits Raichu's options. Still, there's some good synergy. Pikachu can target foes with low move or frailer figures in general, then Raichu can provide an extra kick against foes less susceptible to Electro Ball. Raichu will have to slow down a bit to let Pikachu keep up, which is ironic since Surge Surfer is supposed to boost Raichu's speed, but only moving 6 spaces a turn is still solid. While Raichu is no longer a squishy Pikachu, its bulk is still under average, and if it is destroyed, your Pikachu will be stranded, since Raichu's the one activating the bonding. It might be useful to get your Pikachu engaged with enemy figures, so they can't target Raichu if they survive your attacks. Lastly, Surf is just here for flavor. There's no reason the surfing Raichu should need to stop moving on water tiles. Last from Alola is Alolan Vulpix. Honestly, their best quality might be the lowest cost of any ranged squad in Pokemon HeroScape, though obviously there are plenty of cheaper options with the real cards added. Mono Ice typing doesn't do anything on most maps other than hit the opponent's ground types, but Vulpix at least has a good ability in Icy Wind. When a Vulpix wounds a figure with its normal attack, that figure moves 2 less spaces on your opponent's next turn. Reducing your opponent's move helps Vulpix keep their distance from figures which would be threatening up close, and if you are on a snowy map, it can limit a character with a move of 5 to only moving a single space on their turn. Still, this attack is quite low to pressure most heroes, and while it's suitable against squads, you aren't exactly getting any value out of Icy Wind against them. Still, a solid option if you're down to your last few points, I suppose. With that, let's pop over to Galar and see what they have in store. We start off Galar with the third and final bonding starter, Cinderace. Its special attack, Pyro Ball, normally has a range of 4 and an attack of 3, but if Cinderace uses all 7 of its movement for the turn, without climbing elevation or repeating spaces, that range gets bumped up to 8. This is tied for the longest ranged attack out of all the figures I've made, and even in base Heroscape there are a few figures which can match it. However, requiring Cinderace to run around to unlock its full range limits its ability to camp with it, making it better suited to hit and run strategies. Cinderace is also unfortunately limited compared to Meganium and Samurott, only having one squad to bond with, but that squad should have some decent synergy with Cinderace. We'll go over the bonding synergy when we get to that squad, but for now, Cinderace is just a speedy bunny with a funny soccer ball. Did somebody call a cab? Cause Corviknight is here. Similar to Reuniclus's Magic Guard, Corviknight's bulk is boosted by Mirror Armor, giving it an immunity to special abilities. And in some cases it's even better, blocking non-damaging effects like losing an order marker or rolling less attack dice. Coupled with flying, giving Corviknight an immunity to hazardous terrain and fall damage, and there's little that can actually mess with Corviknight outside of direct attacks. True to its role transporting trainers around the Galar region, Corviknight's fly ability allows it to carry an ally with it. This both lets you move 2 units for the price of 1, while also letting that second unit ignore elevations. The immediate comparison is to Theracus, a figure from Classic Heroscape who can also fly and carry an ally with it, but is both significantly cheaper than Corviknight while also outpacing it. Corviknight is less effective as a pure mount, but it provides more utility once it's gotten a figure in position. Its bulk is much higher, especially with Iron Defense, and has a higher attack, meaning Corviknight can put up a better fight while defending the figure it just dropped into the fray. It also has a bit more flexibility with the figures it can move, being able to scoop up a figure it passes over, or one beside it at the start of the turn. While most armies will probably prefer Theracus for the lower cost and higher move, Corviknight can be a surprisingly valuable addition for armies with the extra points to throw at it. I see Corviknight as an interesting parallel to Sergeant Drake Alexander. Both are melee heroes with a surprisingly high mobility given their move values of 5. Sergeant Drake is protected against ranged attacks, while Corviknight is protected against special abilities. And while Corviknight isn't hitting 6 attack, being able to fly means it can easily grab height on a figure if it's beside a ledge, and 5 attack after height advantage is nothing to scoff at. Plus, it's far bulkier than Drake ever was regardless of height. Overall, a solid figure, though it lacks anything especially powerful. We're skipping to dessert early with Appleton. Appleton's Sweet Scent ability lets it move up to 3 small squad figures to spots beside it if you roll an 8 or higher. Appleton is a strong counterpick to certain squads, dragging them towards it and even attacking one of them. And even if your opponent only brings medium squads or larger, having Appleton draw your own small squad figures towards it gives it a sort of pseudo-bonding ability, though obviously it's less reliable given the die roll. Above average bulk is nice, especially with Leech Seed helping Appleton stay healthy with all those squads it's drawing in, and while its attack is average, Mold Breaker allows Appleton to land hits which other characters can't. I didn't design Appleton with this in mind, but it really is the ultimate counter to the Death Reavers. Appleton can force them to come close and slowly pick them off one by one, negating their scatter ability with Mold Breaker. While Appleton does have this in its favor, it's a fairly expensive answer to such a cheap squad. Even at 60 points, you're only able to draw in 1.5 squads of rats, meaning you've only handled 90 points worth. And again, if your opponent brings no small squads, Appleton is a lot less useful. Even with the ability to bring in your own squad, they aren't able to attack, so you might be better off just using that squad by themselves. But the flexibility of Sweet Scent should give Appleton some interesting strategies. It's time to rock with Toxtricity. Its Punk Rock ability lets it attack all the figures adjacent to it at the same time, while also increasing the chance of both static and toxic by adding 2 to your 20-sided die rolls. One problem with the electric type, as I've designed it, is that few of its members will take advantage of static since they all want to stay at range. Toxtricity not only fixes this, but adds on the poison chance to really screw over any heroes who get next to it. The +2 to your d20 rolls might sound a bit mild, but it essentially turns toxic into a 50-50, and boosts static all the way from a 20% chance to a 30% chance, so it's not to be taken lightly. Our first Galarian squad is Clobopus. Its Rock Smash ability grants your Clobopus double skulls when attacking a figure with no wounds. Like Esper, Clobopus is here to kill other squads. And while it's arguably less effective in that regard, its ability also lets it take a big chunk out of an undamaged hero. It still suffers from most melee figure weaknesses, but it can be effective with cover from the map or your other figures. And the fighting type adding another skull on for good measure can practically guarantee your Clobopus will deal some damage. Finally, we have Snom. There isn't much Snom does which other characters can't do better, but on snowy maps it can be a menace. Its Icy Scales ability prevents it from being targeted by any enemy attack or ability, so long as the enemy isn't adjacent and Snom is on a snow or ice tile. 7 range is already solid, and the combination of snow blocking most ranged attacks while hindering your opponent's ability to engage you is brutal. There's some synergy with Aurorus, who creates snow for you at the start of each round, though it likely won't be as impactful since the patch is so small, meaning your opponent's figures won't take nearly as long to get engaged. Still, while it is 10 points more expensive than Vulpix, I can see it getting some play if only for its bug type. This is the only ranged bug squad, allowing it to hit dark type super effectively without worrying about pursuit. We're all done with Galar now. It's time for a blast from the past with Hisui. Our starter from Ancient Hisui is Decidueye. Its special attack, Triple Arrows, is simple but effective. It has a range of 4 and an attack of 3 and can be used 3 times in one turn. Heroes with multi-attacks are super useful, essentially giving them the offensive benefits of a squad and the defensive benefits of a hero all in one. It lets Decidueye mow down a bunch of squad figures, and even against heroes, a bunch of smaller attacks can fish for bad defense rolls, which can be more valuable than one big hit. A few heroes around this price range have multi-attacks, but none can attack 3 times at range. Speaking of, a range of 4 is better than melee, but not so high that it can keep foes at bay if they survive the barrage. And while Decidueye has some other good tools, they don't really synergize well with Triple Arrows. Both Brick Break and Leech Seed buff Decidueye's normal attack, and if you're sure you'll get the kill, it might be worth the attempt just to fish for the heal. But more often than not, Decidueye is just going to be the Triple Arrows machine. Next is the Guardian of Grand Tree Arena, Kleavor. Kleavor's special power is Stone Axe, which lets it place a trap on the space of a figure it destroys. This trap then deals 1 unblockable wound to the first character which passes through this space. It shouldn't be too hard for your opponent to get around, but it does restrict their movements, especially for squads. Notably, if Kleavor can pin down a figure on an important space, such as one close enough to snipe your base or one with a glyph, and destroy them, the opponent will be forced to take the splinter damage to reclaim that spot. This is especially useful if your opponent wants to take that spot with a squad, since one of them will have to be destroyed for another to take the spot back. Kleavor, then, is a melee figure who can take out ranged units and hold down the spot they occupied, without any risk to itself and without needing to sacrifice its ability to retreat or get in position for another attack. Still, most spots aren't so crucial that the one next to it won't get the job done, and only having one set of splinters can make this tactic less useful. But there are plenty of army setups which will need to make sacrifices because they had to set their character up just one space over. Wanna kick your opponent while they're down? Sounds like a job for Hisui and Quillfish. Barb Barrage gives each of your Quillfish an automatic skull whenever they attack a figure who has already taken damage. This helps them take on those bulkier heroes. Even if you don't get a chance to chip them in advance, all it takes is one good roll to start bombarding your opponents with boosted attacks. You'll notice that Barb Barrage isn't doubling Quillfish's attack like its opposite ability, Clobbopus's Rock Smash. This is because Clobbopus loses its boost the moment that boost makes any impact, so it's allowed to be stronger. Doubling each Quillfish's attack could lead to a hero getting wiped in a single turn, and that's before accounting for the poison chance. Opponents can snipe these little bastards with range, but once they get in, their poison damage and extra powerful leaving engagement attacks make them extremely threatening up close. Being the only Dark-type squad, they are comparable to the Knights of Weston from the base game, whose ability, A Coward's Reward, also gives them an increased leaving engagement attack, just like Pursuit. Quillfish trades the Knight's bonding, higher defense, and extra squad member for higher movement, better damage against wounded heroes, and a poison effect, plus the guarantee that their leaving engagement attacks won't fail against targets with disengage abilities. The Knights are one of the best melee squads in base HeroScape, and while Quillfish outputs more damage on its own, I feel the lack of bonding might hold them back in comparison, so they won't power creep the Knights. Next are the elusive illusion masters Hisui and Zorua. Their illusion ability is like the concealment ability found on official HeroScape figures. When a Zorua is targeted by an attack from a non-adjacent opponent, they can avoid it with a roll of the 20-sided die, with that roll getting easier the further away the attacker is. In Zorua's case, they need a 17 or higher, but the real number will range from 16 to as low as 10, given the average range of most units. The Zorua are a tricky squad, using ranged attacks while blocking most ranged attacks from your opponents, even special attacks. The die roll is potentially frustrating, but that pales in comparison with the frustration your opponent feels when they keep failing to hit these tricky bitches. They're pretty similar to the Mahawken River tribe, with illusion being a strict improvement on Concealment 19, but differ in how they use their evasion. The tribesmen use concealment to get close to their target and activate their other two abilities, which boost their melee prowess and give them a situational bonding ability. The tribesmen work best in melee combat, with their ranged attack and concealment simply giving them better tools to get into melee range. Meanwhile, Zorua is perfectly fine staying at range, and Infiltrator even lets them run away from characters that manage to pin it down. However, this does mean that when they are engaged, they'll get blown up instantly, since they don't get a defense boost like the Tribesmen. And against characters which can bypass illusion, most notably all dragon types, Zorua is basically helpless. Still, against most characters, Zorua can be super annoying, especially when they gang up on the same figure with scrappy boosted attacks. We have another flying taxi with Hisui and Braviary. Braviary is mobility pilled. He has flying to boost his regular movement, teleport if he wants to move without taking a leaving engagement attack, and his Esper Wing special attack to rush into a crowd of enemies and strike up to 3 of them. This can lead to some of these abilities feeling a bit wasted on him, especially teleport, but it also means he can respond to multiple kinds of threats. He does not want to mess with rock types though, since one bad defense roll will shut down all of Braviary's abilities for the round. Braviary will probably be at his best flying up to height, raining down ranged attacks on approaching foes, then using Esper Wing to approach or teleport to retreat if he starts to get surrounded. The last blast from the past is Hisui and Gudra. This thing was built in a lab to never die. Steel typing with these defensive stats was already a lot, but Shelter doubling its defense roll against ranged attackers is a huge boon. Small note, but Iron Defense does not get doubled, since Gudra doesn't actually roll the automatic shield, but that is a minor snag in an otherwise impressive defensive profile. It's also putting up some decent offense thanks to Mold Breaker shutting down defensive abilities, including, ironically, an opposing Gudra's Shelter. Despite that though, Gudra is hitting a little softly for its price, and while it's less likely to take range damage, it's not invincible, so faster range figures or those with special attacks can lame you out and play the long game. But Gudra's still an excellent tank, able to put a lot of pressure on campier opponents. And with that, we are on to the latest region, Paldea. The final starter Pokemon we're adding to HeroScape is Quaquaval, completing the trio of fighting-type bird starters. What begins the game as just an average melee attacker gets pretty dangerous after each kill it gets with Aqua Step, a special attack with a power of 3 that increases Quaquaval's move value for every figure it destroys. This potentially gives Quaquaval a move of 8 later on, and on maps with lots of water, it can even reach 11 spaces moved with Swift Swim. The main thing holding Quaquaval back is Aqua Step itself. It isn't particularly powerful, and I'm sure there are times where Quaquaval will go for an Aqua Step but miss the kill where a normal attack would have taken it, especially with Brick Break. But if you can bully a bunch of weak squad figures, notably those which Quaquaval hits super effectively, you might be able to get some steps in, especially with Feather Dance softening the attacks of potential Aqua Step targets. If you're disappointed I included Quaquaval and not one of the other starters, here's a big pinch of salt to take my opinion with. Garganical is a slow tank, but it can put out some scary damage. Its Salt Cure special attack is a melee attack of 3, and when it hits, it adds an extra wound on top of what the attack dealt. Then, the target is subject to additional Salt Cure damage. The Garganical player just needs to roll a 16 or higher to inflict another wound on the targeted figure, or an 11 or higher if the target is a water or steel type. Poison effects are already great, and not only does Garganical have an additional free wound before the poison chance, its odds are better than an actual poison type when targeting water and steel types. Salt Cure is also far more consistent than the original poison attack, Sijoa's Poison Sting. Garganical gets the first wound for free, then has either a 25 or a 50% chance to inflict a second wound. Meanwhile, Poison Sting only has a 50% chance to get the first wound and 30% to get 2. Obviously, Sijoa has the higher damage potential, as it can keep chaining successful hits or just kill the target outright if it rolls a 20, but Garganical is far more reliable at getting the 2 wounds it promises. Next up is the one and only fire squad of this set, Charcadet. Already, Charcadet has some of the best stats of all the ranged squads, not really lacking in any area, unlike squads like Snom and Wooper. Its Flame Charge ability gives any Charcadet starting their turn adjacent to a friendly fire-type hero an extra 2 move for that turn, making them extremely speedy. Additionally, its Spite ability makes every skull a Charcadet rolls count as 2 if that Charcadet successfully defended against an attack during your opponent's last turn. It lacks any defensive abilities like the other ranged squads though, compounded by its weak defense, so your Charcadet units need those improved stats to pull through before they get picked off. As for how they work with Cinderace, there's solid range support for it. Flame Charge allows Charcadet to keep pace with their leader, though it means reinforcements will take a while to catch up if your initial squad starts falling. If Cinderace does end up stranded with no Charcadet by its side, though, it should be able to hold its own until they catch up. It can still fire off Max Range Pyro Balls by retreating or Ziggzagging if it doesn't want to secede a valuable area. By the time the Charcadet can get close enough to back it up, Cinderace should have been able to keep its distance from the enemy and stay healthy long enough to benefit from the reinforcement. Next up is Pokemon's Rosie the Riveter, Tinkaton. Tinkaton is another figure with a big explosive attack, though the downside isn't nearly as punishing. Her Gigaton Hammer is a melee attack with a power of 7, but to compensate for its power, she has to reveal the X order marker to use it. She can use the attack without that restriction if she targets a flying type, though. And with Steel boosting her defense and Fairy boosting her movement, Tinkaton is pretty capable at getting close enough to launch her Gigaton Hammer. Then if the target is destroyed or Tinkaton doesn't mind risking the leaving engagement attack, she can retreat quite a distance thanks to Prankster. The bit about targeting flying types isn't game accurate in the slightest, but I thought it was a funny reference to her beef with Corviknight, and frankly, flying characters have had it too good for too long in this game. When she's not bringing the hammer down though, she's not doing much. Sure, her bulk is good and her movement is above average, but that pitiful attack of 2 isn't threatening anything tanky enough to live the initial Gigaton Hammer. Tinkaton might be useful as a shock troop, running up to take a big chunk out of something with Gigaton Hammer, then sit there while your other units finish it off with ranged attacks, but she is pretty expensive for this role. All in all, Tinkaton lives by the hammer and dies by the hammer, so you'd better hope it hits. The final hero of the set is the Marshy Mad Lad, Clodsire. Normally a figure with Clodsire's defenses is strong until your opponent starts overwhelming it with boosted attackers. Even if it's just the extra die from height advantage, it makes a big difference over the course of a few turns. But that's where Unaware kicks in. Clodsire negates your opponent's boosts both when they attack Clodsire and when Clodsire attacks them. Clodsire isn't particularly strong or anything, but when you can't even get height advantage over it, you can start to feel the extra pressure it exerts. It still suffers against figures with a type advantage over it, and all dragon types are able to boost their attacks against it thanks to Mold Breaker. But if you have other figures to take them on, then Clodsire can be a surprisingly resilient little guy. The final unit to discuss is Poltergeist, the preferred Pokemon for performative men. It's the last of the unique support squads, and its trademark ability is Hospitality. Once per turn, you can attempt to heal a character, which one of your Poltergeist moved adjacent to this turn, but which did not start that turn adjacent to them. The odds for this roll vary from 12 or higher to 6 or higher, depending on how many Poltergeist move adjacent to the target this turn, and a successful roll will heal 1 wound from the target. Poltergeist is going to be a menace, but only when paired with Meganium. Having between a 45 and a 75% chance to heal 1 wound from your figures is nice, but it does literally nothing else, making it super passive. With Meganium though, you can not only put up some offensive pressure while fishing for a heal, but you can help your Poltergeist last longer thanks to Safeguard. You'll eventually have to burn some turns to retreat your Poltergeist, but these guys can temporarily turn Meganium into an unkillable monster. These guys are just a little too expensive to include in the Meganium Ferroseed team if you have all 4 Ferroseed squads, but replacing one with Poltergeist gives Meganium some powerful support. Alright, we're finally done highlighting all the Pokemon. Thank you to everyone who stuck through this whole video. In case it wasn't clear, I wasn't actually trying to sell the concept of a Pokemon HeroSkip collab to the Pokemon company itself. Rather, I wanted to do this deep dive to hopefully get more people like you interested in HeroSkip. I meant it when I said, over an hour ago at this point, that this game has a lot of potential, and that it's been held back by bad timing. It's not simple by any means, but it is intuitive once you start playing, and both the lore and the mechanics are perfect for adding just about anything to the game. If it were even remotely popular, I could see this being like the Fortnite of board games. There are tons of franchises I love which could fit right in, and plenty of others I don't care about but other people go nuts for. Anything is possible, as long as Hasbro doesn't keep limiting themselves to fossils like G.I. Joe. If this giant ramble somehow got you interested in trying the game out, there are 2 ways to get into HeroSkip. The first is the physical game itself, which you can either get online at the Renegade Game Studio website or in person at your local game store. Not a video game store like EB Games. If a place sells stuff for Warhammer or D&D, you might end up finding some HeroSkip stuff there. I recommend the Battle Box. It has just enough terrain and figures that you can put together little skirmishes to try out the mechanics before dumping way more money on something like the Master Set. Just keep in mind that you can get it cheaper unpainted or you can get it more expensive with the figures pre-painted. If you want any of the classic figures, you'll have to get them all secondhand, I'm afraid, and they aren't cheap. But you can get around this with the second option, Tabletop Simulator. It's about 26 bucks Canadian, cheaper than any modern HeroScape release, and the Community Workshop has a HeroScape pack which features all the classic figures, including the Marvel and D&D sets. While this is cheaper than buying the physical game, keep in mind that you have to have at least 2 copies in order to play against other people. So between the two of you, it's more like 50 bucks if you aren't waiting for a sale. Plus, it's a lot less fun building the board without that tactile, Lego-like feel the real game has, but it's good to test the waters before committing to a triple-digit price tag. The workshop also features a bunch of other add-on packs with custom characters from series like Marvel, DC, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and even Pokémon, with this pack focusing on the original 151. There's this one for Smash Brothers featuring cards made by... Wait, what? I was shocked when I first saw this. Back in high school, I made a bunch of HeroScape cards for all the Smash Brothers characters at the time and posted them to Reddit. As you can tell, they were not good. I made all of these in Microsoft Paint, down to tracing over each of their models to make the red hitboxes on the right of each card. That thread only ever got like 5 likes. I never thought anyone actually saw it. Huge shout out to Melon Pumpkinhead for putting this together. It's so cool seeing someone was inspired to make a mod to include these cards. I just wish they didn't look like this. If it wasn't obvious by now, I've been a HeroScape fan for a long time. You don't just drop an hour-and-a-half long video about a game you're kind of into, or make an entire fighting game roster worth of custom characters for it twice. It's not a constant interest of mine, more something that pops up whenever I stumble across my old figures or when my friends are back in town and want to play. Hopefully with this video done, I've gotten it out of my system for a while, and I can focus on making videos more of my audience will be willing to sit through. If by some freak chance this video does well and people are interested in more custom figures, I do have some ideas I've been sitting on. But I'm not making another mega dump video like this if there's no demand for it. One is more than enough. Again, huge thank you to anyone who made it this far. At this point, I think you should subscribe to the channel for your own sake. Clearly whatever's wrong with you is the same thing that's wrong with me. I'll be hard at work on the next video once this one is up. I'm praying it doesn't spiral out like this one did, and I can get it up within a month or two. I'll see you then. Take care.